welcome everybody to Hindutva, when we let others define us. So my name is Sarvajit Thakur again. And before we get started, I'd like to give share a brief background to today's discussion, because exactly 2 weeks ago today, in the What is Hindutva session of this conference, we studied the origin and evolution of the term Hindutva. And we are not going to repeat that today. So I just want to quickly recap what we did 2 weeks ago. We said that the concept traces its origin back to Rajnarayan Bose in 1866 and Chandranath Basu in 1892. Later on, Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak defined Hindutva somewhat narrowly, as he insisted on the infallibility of the Vedas in the context of being a Hindu. Veer Savarkar, who is credited with the coining of the term Hindutva, was actually not the one who came up with this concept. He actually expanded it. He expanded Tilak's definition to include non-Vedic traditions of Jains, Buddhists, Lingayats, and Sikhs, who shared the common cultural heritage and the ancient knowledge systems of the land of Sapta Sindhu, or Hindustan. Interestingly, the Indian Constitution, the secular Indian Constitution, and the Hindu Succession and Marriage Acts that were passed in the 1950s use precisely Savarkar's definition of a Hindu. In the Hindu Acts, they included the Jains, Sikhs, and Buddhists, but excluded Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Zoroastrians. So with that background, it's kind of interesting that of late, this term Hindutva, which literally means the state of being a Hindu or Hinduness, has become so politically charged and contentious. It has been hijacked and weaponized by certain elements of the press and academia, and it has divided the Hindu community. So in the next hour, we will investigate how to respond to this challenge. Can we reclaim or reframe the Hindutva narrative? And to help us with some answers, we are joined by two outstanding panelists. First, we have Dr. David Frawley, who has written numerous books on the Vedas, Hinduism, yoga, Ayurveda, and Vedic astrology. In 2015, he was honored by the Government of India with the Padma Bhushan Award, also conferred upon him by the South Indian Education Society is a special national eminence award as an international expert in the field of Ayurveda, yoga, and Vedic astrology. Joining us also is Dr. Subhash Kak. He is the Regents Professor of Computer Science at Oklahoma State University, an honorary visiting professor of engineering at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and a member of the Indian Prime Minister's Science, Technology, and Innovation Advisory Council. He has published on the history of science, the philosophy of science, Vedic astronomy, and the history of mathematics. He is a preeminent Indologist who has challenged the Aryan invasion and migration theory and the dating of the Rig Veda, which was arbitrarily done at 1500 BCE by Max Muller, and still finds its way in mainstream Indology. And Dr. Kak has challenged it with Vedic astronomy and other arguments. In the Encyclopedia of India, by the renowned historian and South Asian expert Stanley Wolpert, Dr. Kak has a dozen citations, way more than any other scholar of Indology or academic. So Subhashi, over to you first for your thoughts, and then we'll follow that up with 15 to 20 minutes each. Subhashi first, and then Davidji.
Yeah. Namaskar, everybody. Namaskar, Sarvajit ji. Namaskar, other panelists, David, Sonal ji, Vivek ji, Kalyan ji, and all the people who are watching and listening. Very pleased to have this opportunity because what has happened in recent months, this whole brouhaha about Hindutva has brought certain issues into the open, which needed to be discussed and have, for a variety of reasons, been shoved under the carpet, so to speak. And the main thing that needs to be discussed is, well, who speaks for India or who speaks for Hinduism? What is Hinduism? Now, there is a certain understanding that our swamis and great scholars have had, or great artists like Sonalji and others have, which has been inspirational for people for generations. But contrasted from that is another idea of Hinduism, which has been written up by Western Indologists and their Indian followers for some time. And let me begin with this famous quote by the great Sri Lankan and English historian of Hinduism and Buddhism and art, namely Ananda Kumaraswamy, who in 1940 or so made this astonishing statement. He says, India and Hinduism has been studied for about 150 years by Western scholars and their Indian followers. And one thing can be said with total clarity, which is that literally all the claims that these scholars have made about Hinduism are incorrect. Which is very astonishing. Now, of course, Western scholars have generally tried to dismiss this statement of Ananda Kumaraswamy, but I believe he was right. He was right because basically, leaving out stuff that I worked on, namely science or the Shastras, history of philosophy, or history of astronomy and mathematics, or even the way modern science has evolved with quantum mechanics as the very heart of it. And the very creator of quantum mechanics, say Austrian Vedantin named Erwin Schrödinger, claiming that the central idea of quantum mechanics came to him from the Upanishadic Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahma, and so on. And the leading philosophers of quantum mechanics saying that there is no inconsistency between quantum mechanics and Vedanta. It's a big, big statement to make. Now, we Indians don't know about it because these things are not discussed. History of Indian science is not discussed in the Indian curriculum. Now, speaking for what is Hinduism? How it's been presented in the last 100 years is that Hinduism is about caste and it's about religion. It's about hierarchy and control, and it's about emotional expression in terms of various forms, in terms of the religious expression that Indians have. Now, while certainly society is always complex, and certainly a land like India with its population, with its complexity of people moving in and out, while there may have been some truth to the stratification that people have discussed, but we do now know that when in 1801, the English did their census, most jatis in India did not know what varna they belonged to, but what the sociologists, the Western sociologists, the census takers and Indian followers made this hard mapping of the jatis to varnas, or they created this varna thing, even though even Megasthenes, when he speaks about India in Indica, claimed that there were many, many different communities within India. So I think the time has come to challenge this, and this is what is really happening. Hinduism, ultimately, if you go back to Hinduism itself, is the path of knowledge. The word Veda itself means knowledge, and as Atma Vidya, it's the knowledge related to consciousness, which is the very heart of science now. Science, after all the journeying that it has done, whether in psychology or neuroscience or in physics, has reached to this boundary as to what is consciousness. In physics, who is the observer? Because we cannot explain the observer as a physical system. Why does the observer has freedom? Or in psychology and neuroscience, where does the observer reside? Where does the self reside in the brain? You explore the brain using fMRI, but you don't find a single spot which lights up when one is conscious, right? So where is the observer? And this is precisely the very heart of Hinduism, as Atma Vidya. In Mundaka Upanishad itself, there is a distinction made between Apara and Paravidya. Apara Vidya is knowledge of all outside things, which is where we are projecting through our consciousness to the outer world, even though all the knowledge that we possess and all the experiences that we have reside in our consciousness, but we observe through our consciousness. And language is about naming and talking about interactions between objects that have been named. And that is all Aparavidya. And the rishis realized that Paravidya is beyond Apara. Paravidya cannot be described in language. So you also have the idea of Paravakya, for example, Paravak. You have 4 kinds of language, Vaikhari, Madhyama, Pashyanti, where it has some comprehensiveness. But beyond that is Para. So what Hinduism is ultimately is about Para, is about knowledge at many different levels. And it's a universal approach to reality, because within each human being, no matter what their origin or what their jati, is the same Purush. So everybody has the same access to this knowledge. And so Hindutva, in its very heart, is this whole schema related to what the mystery is. And that mystery has 2 aspects to it: the physical universe, which is governed by rhythm or laws with order, which is why in the very famous dialogue in Bhagavatam between Yudhishthir and Narada, Yudhishthir comes to Narada and he says, how does one live one's life? And Narada tells him that, look, you go through sciences, you go through Apara until you arrive at paradoxes. You arrive at a point where your Apara knowledge, your Shastric knowledge reaches a certain limitation. And it's at that point that you are then ready to receive Paravidya. That's where yoga kicks in. In order to really go to the very heart of your being, you have to first journey outside, and then you bring back in that path to your very heart. And so in that sense, we don't really reject what academic scholarship has done, but that academic scholarship is extremely limited. We need to now, with that in the background, give proper respect and recognition to India's own tradition related to spiritual knowledge, related to the very essence of what these shastras are, because all these shastras, after all their multiplicity that we have of forms, go to the starting point, which is one, which of course, say in Sankhya is Purusha, or which is Brahman in other places. So how do we journey back to their heart? And that journey is now central. Why is it central? Because modern society has reached a crisis point because of AI. Jobs are going to disappear. Science itself is facing a crisis because of dark matter and dark energy, and nowhere for neuroscience to find out where the self resides. With machines, with embedded computers within them, are going to replace humans at almost everything. So that by using only the outer reality as a guide, which is what the Western paradigm has taken us to a certain point, is reaching the very limitations of its value, which is one reason why there are so many people who are in a state of despair. 90,000 Americans, for example, died of opioid overdose last year, and so the time has come. The time has come for all the Vedic ideas, for Hindu ideas, to be center stage and not being written up the way academic departments have written them up, because that's totally wrong. As Ananda Kumaraswamy warned us 80 years ago, we need to reclaim it for ourselves. And I would imagine that HUA and other organizations and temples are in the process of doing it, or lay organizations all across the world, because this knowledge belongs to all of humanity, and the humanity has reached a point where they are literally thirsting for it. So it's for us to fight the prejudices that have been presented to the general public. Although the general public, the thoughtful people are quite aware that this is all quite wrong, because as in his very inspirational remarks, Vivek ji was mentioning that people do trust Indians. They value them for service, for sacrifice, spirituality, which our mothers taught us, and everybody wants to be connected to such a sense of being, and so it's very good that Hindutva is being debated, because all the wrongs that have been propagated about it by those who want to control discourse. And this is, of course, something that goes back to European racism and Eurocentrism of the colonial times. So we need to throw off this colonial view of Hinduism and reclaim it for what it is. So I'll just stop here, and then perhaps we can come back to some of these things later on. Thank you, Sarvajit ji.
Thank you very much, Subhash ji, and over to David for your thoughts, David ji.
Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. First, I want to thank the Hindu University of America for the tremendous work they've done over so many years, for their wonderful future with the new support they have, and for organizing this particular type of conferences, which are so well needed. I also want to thank Professor Subhash Kak for his very clear, insightful overview remarks. And I want to do a few things. One, I want to put this into a certain perspective overall. And let's just go back historically. India, throughout history, up until a few centuries ago, was a highly lauded country for wealth and wisdom, and its spiritual dharmic traditions were also highly lauded, sought after by Greeks and Romans, by mystics throughout the Middle Ages, and even by European philosophers in the 17th, 18th, even 19th centuries and more. And then when India came under colonial rule, the British worked to deconstruct this idea of India as wealthy and wise, and kind of put it on par with a primitive, backward, superstitious, unclean country and civilization, or no civilization at all. And there was a kind of almost equation of, in the 19th century, of redeeming the dark heart of Africa and redeeming the dark heart of India, getting rid of superstition and idolatry, and bringing in science and Christianity. So that required a negation of India as a civilization. It required a deconstruction of any Indian unity. And instead, the idea of India was a diverse country of various invaders or various discrete or warring or different groups. There was no real India, and there was no real Hinduism. Now, in the Indian independence movement, there was the revival of the Bharatiya tradition, the Hindu tradition, all these things. And we had great thinkers, Vivekananda, Ramatirtha, Aurobindo, Tagore, so many, you know their names, who put up this idea of India as something universal and as a great civilization overall. We have the famous remark of Mahatma Gandhi when he was asked what he thought of Western civilization. He said it would be a good idea. So we had this clash. And then also we had in the late 19th century, the revival of mystical India through yoga, Vivekananda, and spreading worldwide. So India has had the devotees on one side, the spiritual side, and the detractors on the colonial side. And as Vivek Agnihotri has mentioned, in the post-independence era, the Marxists took over the history of India in India. And as a result, they redeemed and restored the colonial idea of India as backward and superstitious, but from their political perspective, not from the old simple missionary perspective. And they transmitted this idea of backward India to academia as a whole, which was also came out of the colonial model to begin with. And so it embraced these. And it's sad to know that today, after World War II, and there's been an academic re-examination of traditional cultures, Africa and Native Americans, and a rejection of the colonial model, and the giving of greater spirituality and culture and civilization to these ancient civilizations, and seeing them as having been oppressed and misrepresented. Unfortunately, that change has not occurred relative to India, and academia is largely continuing the old colonial narrative in new clothes. Meanwhile, academia is suspicious of this very great popularity of yoga, Vedanta, Ayurveda, Indian gurus, and so many things that have spread worldwide, and has also sought to either ignore it or undermine it. For example, in schools of Hindu studies, departments of Hindu studies, they never talk about contemporary gurus, whether Aurobindo, Yogananda, Chinmayananda. I mean, there's so many who have come to the West, who are known in the West, they're quite ignored. And they use, again, this kind of Manusmriti caste idea of Hinduism. So it's very important to see how this distortion is continuing there, even though the great majority of the public has seen the yogic face of Hinduism. The problem is people don't always see that as Hinduism, they see that as a tradition from India. And very few people in the West can actually define Hinduism beyond these stereotypes. And almost none of them have heard of the term Hindutva. So there's a lot of ignorance that is going on there too that we have to see. Now, in addition, over the past few decades, there has been the Hindu diaspora globally as one of the most affluent and educated and peaceful communities. It's gone totally against the anti-Hindu, anti-India stereotypes. And it's also caused them some trouble. So now there's an attempt to kind of discredit the Hindu diaspora as also kind of elitist, or something like the Jewish tradition, not accepting of everybody, that sort of thing. But it's just a reaction to the power of the Hindus in the different countries where they live. And then on top of that, we have the resurgence of India, and particularly under Narendra Modi, the resurgence of a proud Hindu India, rather than an apologetic, eclectic India that doesn't know particularly what it is or what its identity is. So this is the general background that I want to look at the picture with. And I would say the main problem with the Hindu community and Hinduism in the West, it hasn't defined itself educationally, and it also has not defined or asserted itself politically. I will address the political side first because I'm not going to spend as much time with it. But overall, the Hindus, nobody really knows, if you ask the common person, what is Hinduism? There's no simple guideline of the principles of Hinduism. And so any number of ideas can go along with it. So one of the things I wanted to recommend to the Hindus in America, North America, and the West, and the Hindu University, and also to the Hindu temples, is to put forth a simple paper on what is Hinduism, what do we Hindus believe. It should be very short, maybe no more than 3 pages. Hinduism today has done some good work in this area. Many good statements can be found there. And here we emphasize, of course, the spiritual and the philosophical side, yoga, Vedanta, Ayurveda, Vedanta and science, as Subhash Kak was talking about. That is where we have our strength. And that is what they're trying to ignore. The anti-Hindu, anti-Hindutva forces don't mention Hindu spirituality at all. And they don't mention the importance of Hinduism relative to science and medicine. They try to remove Hinduism as kind of backward caste and social practices from the spiritual side of Hinduism, which they might recognize as yoga, Vedanta, or even as Buddhism. So all Hindus should teach their children the fundamentals of Vedanta. Key text, of course, is simply Bhagavad Gita, so that then when they go to school, that they will see what is happening and already be armed to deal with the prejudices and the distortions going on. Even these social prejudices are easy to dismantle once you look at them properly. Hierarchy exists in India, it exists in many other countries. The rich and the poor, the division of society, racism, colonialism. Colonialism is a form of racism that Hindus have also been subject to. So re-education on what Hinduism is, and giving that view to the educators in the schools, the universities, and even the media, and asking them, why don't you have a class on Hinduism? You have so many Hindus in your community. Why don't you have one of our teachers speak to your class? Why don't you take your students to a Hindu temple and see what is actually going on? Educational assertion, changing of textbooks, educational outreach is necessary. So that is on that side. On the related political side, Hindus also have to vote, and vote their spiritual and cultural and religious causes, just as all other groups do. Hindus are the least politically motivated and vote-oriented of any religious group in the world, including not only the Christians and the Muslims, but even the Sikhs are much better organized than they are. And voting is the currency of the modern world. If you don't vote, you're not respected. You can make all the money in the world, you can pay taxes, you can be nice, but voting is what matters. And here we need to highlight what happened with the Great Britain recently. The Hindu community turned out and voted, and it made a difference in the election. It gave them greater respect overall and greater say in the government. And that model should be repeated in the United States and elsewhere. And simply parity. Hindus need to do in the voting realm what all the other groups are doing. They need their lobbyists, their spokesmen, their media people. In religious dialogue, Hindu voices have to be there. You can't have academics speaking for Hinduism. And we need to question this academic apartheid. You go to classes on Hinduism or Hindu-related subjects, and there's no practicing Hindus there. And this is nothing new. A friend of mine years ago was a professor of Buddhism at a major California university, but he could not say he was a Buddhist because he said he could lose his job. Buddhists are also not properly represented. I remember at a Council of Foreign Relationship meeting on the Rohingyas, there were all kinds of Christian and Muslim groups represented there. There was not a single Buddhist there, not a single representative from the Buddhist countries in which the Rohingyas were causing problems or regarded as a difficulty. So let's bring on our Buddhist friends here. Look at the cause of Tibet. Everybody loves and likes the Dalai Lama, but the Dalai Lama's cause of Tibet has gone. You have to have the political savvy, and you have to have the educational savvy. And we have to put together the links: yoga, Vedanta, Ayurveda, Indian music and dance, Sanskrit, Hindu diaspora, temples. These are all faces of Hinduism, which is Sanatana Dharma, a universal tradition, not an ethnic or a geographically defined traditions, misunderstanding of terms aside. A new redefinition of what Hinduism is, educationally and politically, an honoring of Hindu mysticism, and an honoring of the Westerners who have taken up the causes of yoga, Vedanta, and so forth. Vedic studies are coming up in many ways. So this needs to be brought forth. And with these words, I will then open this up more for questions, because I think the dialogue is the most important thing. But I must say that I am a Westerner who discovered bit by bit yoga, Vedanta, Veda, Hinduism, India, Sanatana Dharma, a journey of several decades. So I understand how these changes can occur and why they are slow to happen, but they can be done. We've made tremendous progress, and that is why we are being challenged. And academia is one of the holdouts where people have jobs based upon anti-Hindu, or at least rather limited views. There is a vested interest against us there. But educationally, the more we promote Hinduism as Vedanta and so forth, the less that they can do to challenge that. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, David. While we have you, a few questions for you, some from the audience and some from myself, and I'm paraphrasing some also. You were born in a Catholic family, I believe, and then you got attracted to the Vedic Dharma, Hinduism, Indology. Like to hear a little bit about your story there. How you got interested in the Eastern thought, and also it has been alleged by some of your detractors that you decry Christianity and Islam as religions for lower intellects. I'd like to hear your comments on that allegation as well. I'm sure you're not a Hindu supremacist, but that's the kind of image some of your detractors have tried to portray for you.
Yes. Well, okay. First, let me go through the first part of the question. I came from a Catholic family of 10 children. I have 7 younger sisters. I had an uncle who was a missionary in Bolivia, and that was in Wisconsin. I knew nothing about Hindus or India. Later, we moved to Colorado, and as I grew up and was educated, I had a philosophical mind, and I went through the different philosophical religious traditions of the world, and I discovered Vedanta as the most important thing. And then in the late 60s, all the Hindu gurus were around. We call them yoga gurus. The Yoganandra tradition, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Prabhupada, Sri Aurobindo, teachings of Raman Maharshi, all these things. I got into those rather immediately. So I went there from yoga to Vedanta. And in Sri Aurobindo's work, I found the connection between Vedanta and Veda, particularly Rig Veda. And I began writing for the Aurobindo ashram in the 70s. I came into contact with gurus like Anandamayi Ma and MP Pandit of the Aurobindo ashram. So that is what shaped my view. And by degrees, I discovered more Hinduism as Sanatana Dharma and as this ancient tradition of spiritual knowledge that I believe had influence all over the entire world, including, of course, Europe and all the way to Indonesia, the Philippines in the East, but I think even globally at various levels. And then at another level, I discovered Ayurvedic medicine, which became a very excellent career for me. And that became part of my work. And I went to the ashrams in America, the yoga ashrams, teaching them how yoga, Vedanta, Ayurveda, Jyotish, all these things were integral parts of Sanatana Dharma. And we shouldn't just isolate ourselves in some universal yoga, but we should integrate with all aspects of the Vedic knowledge and share that. and that the universality people appreciated in yoga was in fact the universality inherent in Sanatana Dharma. And since then, I've been engaged in that work in the West and in India. Going there, I was asked to speak to the audiences there for over 30 years on my views of Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, Vedas, Aryan invasion, all those different things. So there, I discovered the leftist slant against Sanatana Dharma, and I began challenging it there as well. And so I've had that kind of a dual role of bringing Vedic knowledge from India to the West, and also upholding and supporting the Hinduism also in India. Hinduism Today was a help. Voice of India was a help. Aurobindo and so forth. So I've continued that particular work. Now, as to your second question about I consider Christians and Muslims to be of inferior intellects. The left likes to create negative stereotypes, calling people names and throwing them out. For example, fascism was a Catholic Italian tradition. It also spread to many other Catholic countries, including Argentina. And yet now they use to go after Hindus or anybody who doesn't disagree with them. The communists had their alliance with Adolf Hitler and partitioned Poland in their favor. But now they're giving the impression that they're somehow representing the forces of light, even though so many millions of people have been destroyed in communist-based genocides. And those academicians of the far left are now coming to the United States and speaking before Western audiences as if they're liberal intellectuals, when many are in fact members of major communist parties, Marxist, Leninist, revolutionaries, for example, Kavita Krishna and so forth. So well-known communists in India are now becoming the voice of Hinduism, and people think, oh, they have an Indian name, that they may be part of that. But they're, again, representing that perpetuation and expansion of the left and carrying these leftist distortions back to America to turn Americans against the Hindu diaspora and the Hindu yogic philosophies. The point I've raised in my work is that Hindu Dharma, for Hindu Dharma, faith and emotion is not enough. Moksha occurs through a higher knowledge that requires deep meditation. It cannot just simply be passed on by a belief. Beliefs are all limited. You people tend to believe in what they want to believe. Beliefs are collective. Beliefs, as the Gita says, can be sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. We also have the famous phrase in English that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and it's also blind belief. So blind belief is a negative factor. So we must remember that, and that is the point I have raised. Now, if they want to take that, some of them, that, and I've also said academia is not in a position to understand texts like Yoga Sutras or yoga. Yoga is about samadhi, which is silencing the mind. Dharana, dhyana, samadhi are things that academia does not learn and does not practice. So they cannot really understand what the Yoga Sutras are merely from historical or logical perspectives, or semantic perspectives, which is what they do. So I have raised those points. And so they say I might consider that academics are intellectually impaired. And my point is that academics, you can, however intellectually evolved you are, to discover the higher truth, as all mystics know, not just simply the Hindu mystics, you must silence the mind and go beyond thought. That is the basis of meditation that so many people are having benefit from today. So that is the basis of me saying, or me being associated with the idea that people who aren't Hindus are intellectually impaired. My point is very simple. We need to go beyond the mind, as the great sages have said, to our inner cosmic universal intelligence, Atma Purusha, that dwells in all beings and that unites us all in the light of consciousness beyond all the endless differences of the opinions of the mind. Hari Om.
Thank you very much for those answers. I have a similar kind of questions for Subhash ji. Coming from the academic world, do you believe that the academicians operate in kind of cartels of like-minded teams, and then they reinforce and propagate, each other's messages? And have we, to some extent, lost the narrative a little bit in the Western world when it comes to the Hindu knowledge systems and the Hindu thoughts in the academia? And if so, how do we wrest it back? And the second related question to you, Subhashji, is about the political left, the far left, both in India and the West, because the progressives, in their zeal, to champion the cause of economic and social justice, want to destroy, all civilization, history. They don't want to think about history. They don't want to think about what the Islamists or the colonizer did for 800 years. They just want to throw it all away and just look at our caste repressions of today and how we are treating the Dalits and so forth. And that's the only lens that they want to view our traditions with. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on, about the far left as well as the academia as it relates to the Vedic Dharma and traditions.
Sabjiji, absolutely excellent questions. The first one is about how does academia work? Well, we know, leaving even study of India, you look at any field. In any academic field, there are certain assumptions that the faculty or researchers in that field accept. And then they take the conversation further, which is the reason why from time to time, people have broken away from established academic disciplines and created their own. Or if you look at Freud or Jung, they had to create their own, they had to break away. So this always happens. Now, what happened in India after 1947, that India decided not to have departments of Hinduism. I think even now, probably only BHU in all the universities of India has an academic department devoted to Hinduism or Indian knowledge system. Nothing at all outside of maybe one university. While Western universities, which from a general perspective, it's sensible to study things which exist. And Hinduism is something that exists. So you must also study religions or social organization or anthropology, how societies evolve. Now, India did not do that. And partly because India was extremely poor at that time, and India was really Indian system was a handover from the British with their colonial view of India and their colonial view of running the country. And as David G correctly pointed out, colonialism also means racism. Why do we have colonialism? Why do we have colonies? Because one race wants to rule over the other race, right? Or one group wants to rule over the other group. So we've kept on with that. And so we have taken agency from ourselves, excepting for some stray individuals like Gopinath Kaviraj or as a scholar and some others. So the time has come, and it's not yet arrived for a real major reform of the Indian system so that our own knowledge tradition is discussed and the conversation narratives restated, because they need to be restated for each generation. Things change. You need to update your arguments. So that's one thing. The second thing is where do we? What was your second question? I'm sorry, I sort of lost that thread. You are muted. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So the first question was about the academia as to how do we, how do we correct the narrative? And the second question was about the far left in general, whether it be India, the US,
Yes.
And it includes the press, the New York Times, Washington
Right.
Post, NPR, and so forth. There are always negative stories about Hinduism and India and so forth. And what's your take
Yes.
on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. So for the first one, of course, there is the new education policy, and hopefully things are changing. And education in India is going to be cast in new ways. And also, I think technology itself is making the old university system of dissemination of knowledge sort of a thing of the past, because now you have the social media and probably new ways of taking the knowledge that is a part of the Sanatana Dharma onto the next generations. And this discussion that we are having is an example of it. The second is the central tenet of progressivism is that all of history is irrelevant. We, through the intellectual work of previous generations, have arrived at a certain point. So it doesn't really matter what happened in India or whether India has had colonialism or whether it was ruled by a group of nasty people. That doesn't really matter. Here we are now, and let the progressive priesthood guide us. And as far as this progressive priesthood is concerned, who are their enemies? Their tradition is their enemy. Now, they think that, well, Christianity with its belief in that miracle, that occurred, or Islam with its miracleism ultimately are not scientific. So they will make whatever adjustments they need to make to fight wars or battles of the present, but eventually they are not their main challenge. They find that their main challenge is Hinduism. Why is it Hinduism? It represents pre-religious tradition of knowledge, and it is a tradition with claims, with truth claims related to consciousness, which is the ultimate frontier of science. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of those who critique Hinduism say that, well, Hinduism is sort of supremacist. They're not against science. They are talking about yoga, or now they might critique yoga itself. They might say, well, this is a fad, or Ayurveda, of balance. But more than all of this is consciousness. Consciousness is the frontier of science. Consciousness is the frontier of science in physics. Who's the observer? In neuroscience, in medicine. Why does placebos work? Why do 32% of the people get well? Just because they imagine that they're being given medicine. Or a lot of the people can get well by themselves. Or how do minds have control to the extent that they have control over the immune system? So Hinduism is a puzzle to them, because they don't understand it. Many of them are good, well-meaning people, but they don't understand, having been educated in a system where there's nothing but the physical body, right? And that is the mainstream Western scientific discourse, is that we are physical bodies. And then there is, of course, society and so on. Hinduism brings in another angle, and that is the angle of the Atman. And that changes everything. So for them, this is the biggest challenge that the West possesses, or Western paradigm possesses. They don't know how to deal with it, because in Hinduism, you also have all kinds of amazing claims. You go back to the earliest darshanas, for example, the sophisticated presentation of even physics, where while the argument is made that all physical properties are a consequence of motion and qualities associated with substances, totally scientific. But it also says that there is also samanya, universal, vishesha, particular, and samavaya, where the observer interacts with the physical system. These things are extremely modern. And then what the West and NYT type of stuff is intrigued by, and they generally don't know it, is that Vedic Dharma or Indian ideas have already played a central role in the development of modern science, or development of modernity as we know it. You look at the whole subject related to society and anthropology, which goes back to de Saussure, the Frenchman, and how he took the ideas from Panini's grammar, that here was a structure which described all of the behavior, linguistic behavior. So there should be similar structures which describe social behavior, right? So already these social sciences go back to India. You look at Bharat's Natya Shastra, science related to gesture and meaning and dance and music. You look at quantum mechanics, the deepest scientific theory there is, where the creator of quantum mechanics, Erwin Schrödinger, claimed that the central idea of quantum mechanics came to him from the Upanishadic Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahman, or the idea in Mundak Upanishad. There are two kinds of sciences: the outer sciences, which are governed by law, and the inner science. The outer science is Aparavidya, and the inner science, which is Paravidya, which is the science of the experiencing self, which is the science of consciousness, which is the frontier of all sciences as they exist now in the academy. So these things have influenced two ways. As David has pointed out, there are a lot of people in the West who are profoundly attracted to it and who are some of the strongest supporters of the Vedic tradition of Hinduism. And that there are some whose knowledge is limited, who are either find it bizarre that all this could be there. Well, they're not well informed. If they were to be well informed, they will change their mind. So I think it's also partly a battle over information. If all of this were to become available, because we're not talking of made up things, this is a part of the mainstream tradition, which is why, I was just watching this great speech by Steve Jobs that when he was down and out at Reed College, he would have, and he had run out of all of his tuition money after 6 months. So he dropped out of college. And then for 18 months, he hung around the campus and sleep in people's dorm rooms, his friends' dorm rooms. But he would have one good meal a week. He would walk 7 miles to the Hare Krishna temple, have his one good weekly meal and come back. And then he went to India for knowledge, or even Zuckerberg went to knowledge for India. Everybody wants to go to India. Why? Because Indians are not talking about caste and this and that. Indian knowledge is about self-knowledge. It's about emancipation and liberation of every human being. So it's a fight over who will represent India. The Western Academy, because they are inheritors to this colonial racist view of India, they want to say that, no, we are going to tell you what Hinduism is. And what everybody, Hindus themselves, knowledgeable people in India, as well as Westerners who've searched and found what it really stands for, are saying that, no, hold it, it is something else. So, well, fight is the way the world progresses. So that fight will continue, and for some time, but eventually truth shall triumph.
Thank you very much. The question in the Q&A box, the new generation is very much against Hindutva because they are hearing anti-Hindutva fake news and erroneous logic. How can we convince our younger generation that Hindutva is the way? So I'm just, I'm not paraphrasing it. This is the question as it appears in the Q&A box. Either one of you, if you wish to respond to that, please.
Subhash?
Okay, well, Hindutva, it means Hinduism. Now, what the left is trying to do is to create a wedge. They're saying, well, Hindutva is bad, Hinduism is all right, because they will battle Hinduism later on. But right now, create a wedge, something similar to what was done for Zionism versus Judaism. Well, so there is really no difference. Hinduism is Hindutva. Hindutva really means Hindu-ness. So this is a false dichotomy, and it's irrelevant. But since there's a lot of this propaganda that's going on, one can see why some young people might think that Hindutva is something terrible. This is something similar that used to be done, that any Hindu group or organization in India is a bad thing. Hindus are not supposed to organize themselves. Well, time for that is gone. We live in the global village. Everybody should organize. Everybody should have their voice.
Thank you.
And I would just want to make a couple of points
Yes,
here.
please.
A lot of it is also just the peer pressure of the young people and the leftist influence in the academia that's doing that. So we must keep that in mind, that we need active associations for the youth on Hindu matters, yoga, Vedanta, and keep their views together. And again, educate them ahead of time so they know that this is coming their way. Because the other aspects of Hindu Dharma, yoga, Vedanta, Ayurveda are popular, and they often have their groups on the campus as well. So let's challenge this with a more positive spirit. We have to defend against it, but we also have to give the youth the idea we have something so valuable that there will be detractors, and we have to understand it's the value that we need to hold.
Yeah, thank you.
May I come in?
Yes, please.
Very, very interesting and exciting dialogues about this particular point. I found that in my talks and discussions, and I always make a commentary of the thing I'm going to perform, short ones, and master classes. Wherever I have a chance, I try not to decry any other belief or faith or religion. B, I'm never defensive. 3, I'm not aggressive. And the most important thing I found was to draw parallels from their own systems and their faith, their religions. For example, small example, when I was dancing in Argentina in Theater de Colón, Buenos Aires in 1997, the last dance choreography was on Mary Magdalene. It originated from the poem Magdalena Mariam, written in Malayalam language of Kerala by a very famous contemporary of Tagore, Vallathol Narayana Menon. It just talks about the beauty of Mary. She was beautiful. And then when she hears the sounds from the street, she runs to the window and watches the procession go by, and her gaze is really following the lead figure, and something happens within her and she discards her jewelry and all that, picks up a jar of perfume and drapes herself in a white cloth shawl, and follows the procession to the house of Simon, and she knocks at the door. That's all famous biblical story, but written in Malayalam. And then as the door opens, she just dashes forward and falls at the feet of Christ, seated Christ. And her copious tears wash the feet. With her silken hair, she wipes them. In the jar of perfume, she sprinkles, and then she picks up the feet and kisses them. And then she asks that famous thing, I heard you say, knock and the door shall open. I have knocked at your door. Will you not allow me entry? And then Jesus blesses her, and it's a very beautiful. I got a lot of ovations and standing ovations and encores and all, but then at the end, when I went back to my green room, ambassador was waiting with the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. And as he saw me, he just fell on his knees and picked up the border of my costume, dhoti, and his tears were flowing. And then we raised him up. He kissed and then he asked in Spanish, we had the interpreter there, simple questions. First, he said, no question. He said, I saw Christ. Then the question, are you Christian? I said, no, I'm Hindu. And then there was a question mark on his forehead. And he asked then that, then how come you dance this? So much so that I saw Christ. And I said very simply that we have Meera and Krishna, we have Amrapali and Buddha, we have Sulabhadra and Kosha, and there are umpteen such narratives, stories, legends, historicities involved also. So where there is love and surrender in love, prema bhakti, madhura bhakti as we call it, then I find no difference. And I find that such parallels also help a lot, not only to older generation, but for the younger generation, that what is the key messages? What are the key messages? We believe in Ananda. I had a little argument with His Holiness. He's invited me to dance at McLeodganj, the theatre, Tibetan Theatre Institute. I believe I'm the only one who's ever been invited there. And he wept as I danced the Shunya Mahari, the dancer of the void, of the living void. And he said, how did you know she's my Kula Devi? Then he invited me to dance again when Buddha Jayanti Park, Buddha's statue was consecrated, and 4 times I picked up a little argument with him in a meeting, and I said, Buddhism, and then dukkha. Dukkha is at the thing of life, Buddha said. I said, I personally do not agree, because for us, Sanatanis, Ananda is the finality. And Ananda is the depth of the ocean, whereas Dukkha and Sukha and all that, they rise and fall like bubbles. And he just laughed. He said, nah, Mansing, Mansing. I'm not trying to say anything about myself, but as I have lived 7 decades and more, it's going to be 8 decades very soon, I see that arguments and all that is okay up to a point. Now, how do you heal the mind? How do you reach out to that soft spot which is just wanting to absorb, like dry earth, parched earth, which wants rain? And I think we have that capacity to do that. Also, another thing, that Sanatana is also, quote unquote, secular. The stories of Panchatantra, Hitopadesha and all, but also there are many, many, many stories that we dance to, as you would call them, secular in today's parlance, as opposed to religious. I don't talk about spirituality. It's a huge, big word and not to be thrown around. For me, at least, I find that it comes on it. There's not a pill that you can administer that now you become spiritual. It may happen, it may not happen, it may happen for a moment, for a few moments, for a few hours, whatever. That state of being that you call spiritual happens in different ways with different people. But secular and sacred, I think we have both in equal measure, and that also needs to be reiterated. And the last point, that how do we relate to societal issues today, whether it's environmental issues, pollution of rivers. There's so many, the state of being for women all over the world. I mentioned that in my little talk. I think these are the places where also we can visit, revisit, navigate, readdress, and bring them to that how did India look at them? And where all does it reflect? As I mentioned, Navaratra, it's nowhere else. So when Vivekji spoke about mother, here is the mother of all. And whether they are judges of the Supreme Court or governors or ministers or doctors or lawyers, they all fall at the feet. They observe fasts, they do pujas, they do rituals. Why? Because exactly that mother gives birth, mother holds you in her womb for 9 months, and it's the mother's thoughts, her processes, mental processes, emotional states that affect the child for life. And therefore, all respect to mother. So some of these things, I suppose, can be shared, and they might also help in reaching out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonalji, for those inspirational stories and closing thoughts. And thanks again to Dr. Subhash Kak and Dr. David Frawley ji for very illuminating and spirited discussions and your thoughts. It was an amazing hour. I think we all learned a lot. And once again, very, very fortunate to have all of you join us for this hour, as a part of the Hindu Heritage Month. Thank you very much, and namaste.